in my wildest dreams, if we'd have gone back a few years, just after the transplant, and someone would have told me that in a few years' time you'll be standing on the Olympia stage in Vegas,
Mhm.
I don't know what words I'd have come out with. It was, and I said this to the guys the other week as well. It's strange because the goals in this sport seem to move all the time. Because I started this journey out at the very beginner level, or amateur level, doing amateur regional shows, and then that became national shows, and then let's go for the pro card, and then okay, we've got the pro card now. Now let's do some pro shows. My first couple of pro shows, last call out. So then you start to doubt, have we come as far as we could possibly go? So then you think, no, no, we'll give it another go. And then you start working your way up the placings. You start making top fives, top threes, and you
Mhm.
get a few second places, and you think, oh, do you know what? I'm so close to nearly getting there. And then you do get there.
Welcome, everyone. This is Gonzalo Herrero, your host from Rise 41. And today with me, I have the pleasure of having IFBB Pro and men's physique competitor Tyler Smith. Tyler, welcome. Welcome
Hello,
today.
thank you. No, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. For those of the audience who might not know, Tyler is a high level competitor. His most recent competition was the Arnold UK, which, if you're a follower of men's physique, this is the highest level. Basically, it's this and the Olympia. It's basically like what's left as far as the high level competitions worldwide. So, Tyler, congratulations on that. On even I mean, just making it to that stage is an achievement and an accomplishment. So, if you could you share how you started this journey? Were you always an athletic person? How did you end up doing men's physique, which is such a niche sport, really?
Yeah, I think even going back to very early ages, even at school, I just loved sport. I loved competing. Always, just at any sort of level, really. But I think obviously in the UK, football, or you guys call it soccer,
Mhm.
is massive over here. So obviously, at grassroots, sort of infant level, that's the sort of thing that we all get into. But then obviously as I progressed through into my teens and everything else, I actually started to take up basketball, because when by the time I was sort of like 13, 14
Mhm.
years of age, I was the height that I am now. So
Right.
I was like 6'3"
Wow.
at 13 years of age. So I started to play basketball, and then that was the direction that I actually went in. So over in the UK, actually ended up playing pro basketball up until the age of about 23, 24.
Oh,
When I was in my teens, I was actually sent over to the States. I went to Ohio University to try to get like a
wow.
recruitment, college program.
Yeah, yeah.
There
No,
was
that's high level then. Okay.
Yeah, there was a few of us that went over. So there was a few guys that got sent to Syracuse, and then the rest of us we got sent to Ohio. But nothing came of that. But we came back to the UK and ended up just playing pro basketball over here.
Right.
But the way that obviously the sport is over here compared to the US, it's not super popular. So
Right.
there's not a lot of money involved and everything else.
Right.
I'd Even though I was playing at quite a decent level, I was still quite a skinny kid.
Mhm.
So I was probably only like 200 pounds, not even that, like 180 pounds,
Wow.
at being at that height. So obviously playing at such a high level, I was getting sort of bullied in the key a bit,
Mhm.
and with all the big men.
Right.
So I started going to the gym just to try to put
Bulk up a
some,
little.
yeah, that's it, yeah, just to put
Right.
some weight on and stuff. And instantly I just really loved it.
Right.
Which I think is the experience that a lot of people have. And I remember it was one off season during the basketball summer, and I was hitting the gym a lot,
Mhm.
and I put quite a bit of weight on. and I went back to pre-season at the beginning of the following year,
Mhm.
and I was finding it quite difficult to run up and down.
Okay, okay, because now all of a sudden you have mass.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. So
Okay,
I managed to get through that season, and I sort of came to a crossroads where I had to decide: do I want to carry on playing ball, but
right,
for very little return because of how small the sport is over here, or do I go into full time employment, which I knew I had to do, and I carry on with the gym as a hobby? So that
right,
was obviously the road that I went down.
right.
And that was what got me into the gym initially, really.
Mhm.
And you know, we love it in those early days, seeing how your body responds. You start to get lumps and bumps in all different
Yeah,
places.
yeah, yeah. You start to like transform,
Mm.
completely, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
you know, we like how we start to fill into t-shirts and stuff like that.
yeah.
So, and then it was sort of like a couple of years into training in the gym, and there was a guy in there at the time who competed, but I had no idea what,
Oh, okay.
competition your level bodybuilding was. I had no idea whatsoever. So,
Mhm.
we just got talking one day, and he said, "Have you ever thought about competing? I think you've got quite good genetics for it." And I just looked at him all confused, and
Competing how?
yeah, I was like, no, no, never thought about it. So, so then what I actually did was, he said, "Well, it'd be quite good if you came to a show to see what it was all about and everything else."
Mhm,
And this was back in, well, I think it was 2008, 2009,
mhm.
and we went to the British finals, which is, it's quite a prestigious
Right, right.
event over in the UK. That's how people like Dorian, and Flex and all the top British guys came through to win their pro card.
Gotcha.
So we went to the British finals that year, and I'd been in the gym sort of like 3, 4 years at this point, and I was watching all the guys come out and go through the routines and everything else, and yeah, I was pretty mesmerized at the time,
Right.
and I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, I'll give this a go." I said, "You watch, this time next year, I'll be on there,"
Okay.
and lo and behold, I was,
And you did.
and that was how my journey started. Yeah.
Wow, wow. So it was like a will to power kind of a thing there. That's incredible. That's
Yeah, it was something that just sort of got me hooked immediately.
mhm, mhm.
And I
And
think that's probably something that a lot of people can relate to as well.
And do you naturally gravitate towards like learning about, nutrition and training and all the things that we do, posing, all of these different aspects of bodybuilding? Did you take to this very naturally? Was it very easy? Did you have a coach that kind of inspired you or a person?
No,
Uh
and do you know what's kind of crazy is because obviously, I mean, I've been competing for just over 16 years now, but to see how the sport and the industry as a whole has changed during that
uh,
time is unbelievably crazy because, we're going back to the times that I'm showing my age now,
uh-huh.
but we're going back to a times when I started that was before social media. So everything that we were doing was pretty much self-taught. So
Mhm.
every month we would buy Flex magazine, muscular development,
Wow.
muscle and fitness, and
Mhm,
we'd basically pick up dietary tips, training tips,
mhm.
and things like that from basically just reading the magazines from back to front.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
and that that was how we sort of how we learned things. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, nowadays, people
Mhm.
coming into the sport, there's so much information available.
Yeah, it's almost an
You
overload, really. Me
Yeah,
being relatively new to the sport, the first thing I noticed was I immediately found, and I think I was very fortunate, found a very good coach,
mhm.
and that definitely because the information overload that's out there is incredible. If you just start searching and googling or chat GPTing in order to find out what to do, it can be overwhelming. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, of course, and but back then, we didn't have that source of information available to us.
Hmm.
So what I thought I had, developed a good diet for myself was actually
Uh,
horrendous.
really?
Um, yeah. So,
What was it like? Like, what are we talking about here?
oh, I used to drink, I'd be drinking a lot of milk.
Uh-huh.
every day. It
Uh-huh.
was very, very sort of like old fashioned, sort of get as many calories in as possible and all this sort of stuff. So it wasn't until I was directed in a correct way that made me realize that, oh no, this is how we do it. Um, but even back then, so the guy that, sort of took me under his wing and said, look, I think you could give it a go. He convicted himself and he did have a coach. So, and at the time, it was a high level British bodybuilder who turned pro himself. And he said, look, why don't you come with me when I go and see him and he can take a look at you and he can tell you what to do and everything else. And I think this sort of shows the differences in how the industry's changed in such a way because I would go to see him at say
Mhm.
16 weeks out from the show. He would look at me, he'd write a diet down, he'd give me what cardio to do on a
Uh,
piece of paper. He'd give me the piece of paper and he'd say, "Come back and see me in 4 weeks." Yeah. He was like,
wow.
"Go away, do that for 4 weeks, come back
Right.
in 4 weeks, and I'll see you again."
Wow,
Yeah,
that almost reminds me of like old kung fu or karate films with like the master in the mountain. You know, you would go to the master, get the
yeah,
lessons, come back,
yeah,
train, and then go back and oh wow. Yeah, it's
yeah,
definitely different.
but it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, but it worked, right?
Yeah,
Obviously. I mean,
it
clearly
worked.
because you've competing at this incredibly high level. So I mean, incredible. Okay, so that gives me like the origin story of the superhero that you are, basically. So so now getting into something a little bit more serious, let's talk
Yeah,
about your experience which you had with chronic kidney disease because this is a very unusual thing for folks in the well in men's physique or in the bodybuilding world. You know,
mhm,
especially you're a young man, clearly healthy, clearly following a very healthy path. It's not like you were doing anything in particular. I assume that would create this. So first, let me ask you, how did you find out that there was something happening, that something was going on with your health, if I may ask?
yeah, of course. So the original, well, the initial warning signs for me was I was starting to experience a lot of difficulty breathing.
Mhm.
And very short of breath. It was difficult to get air in, but this would only go through sort of like short periods, so
Oh,
it wouldn't happen all day long. It would
mhm,
particularly happen late at night or when I was sedentary, just sitting down and things like this. So these periods became a lot more frequent,
mhm,
and it came to a point where there was one day I needed to go to A&E because I was like, this isn't right.
mhm.
um, I need to go and see what's going on. And basically, what was happening was because I've not always been men's physique, by the way. So in
Okay.
the early days, I was an open bodybuilder.
Oh, okay, okay,
That
so
that that
a
that
lot
was
more
how.
mass, I
Yeah,
guess. Okay.
that was how I started because
Oh, okay.
back in 2008, 2009, men's physique didn't exist.
Right, right, that's
It,
relatively new compared to
yeah,
the other classes. Yeah.
exactly. Men's physique didn't come in till like 2013, I think it might have been
Mhm.
2012, 2013, somewhere around there. So obviously back then, if we wanted to be competitive, all we had to choose from was open.
Right,
That was it.
which means
So
big.
I, yeah, I was a much bigger guy then. In the off
Yeah.
season, I'd creep up to 300 pounds.
Oh, wow. Wow, so
Yeah.
really big. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I would, I'd sit between sort of like 290, 295.
Okay.
Um, And so anyway, I was starting to have these issues with breathing, and so I went down to the hospital. They got me in straight away, ran my bloods,
Mhm.
and they couldn't see that anything was wrong. It wasn't until they looked into the bloods a little bit further that they then called me back and they said your kidney function's really low. So the reason for the breathing issues was because my lungs were filling up with fluid,
Ah,
and the kidneys in the body couldn't clear the fluid quick enough.
mhm,
So it was I didn't necessarily have any lower limb edema or anything like that at the time. So I
mhm.
wasn't getting any fluid retention, but the fluid was actually sitting in my lungs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they said, look, we need to do further investigation. We need to keep you in and everything else. Um, they managed to get my GFR back up because at the time of the test, my kidney function was like 30, 33.
Oh, wow.
percent,
Yeah.
or GFR. So it was quite low, but within a couple of days, they got it back up into the 60s.
Hmm.
So we managed to, monitor it over time, over the course of a few years, and they initially put the CKD down to having prolonged high blood pressure over long periods of
Right.
time.
Which we know absolutely
Yeah,
will hurt
yeah.
kidneys. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's without doubt the one of the number one causes of kidney damage is
Mhm.
high blood pressure over long periods of time, and obviously, I was a guy sort of like in my late 20s, early 30s, chasing the size, everything else, wanting to be
Sure.
as big as possible. Not really, and again, this goes back to the information that's available now compared to years ago.
Right.
Back then, nobody ran bloods.
Right.
No,
Nobody
no,
checked blood pressure back in the
no,
day.
no,
Yeah.
nobody paid attention to blood pressure and everything else. And obviously, at the time when I was in, and they were monitoring me and everything else, they did say to me, "Your blood pressure is very, very high."
Hmm.
So that was the first thing that needed addressing. So that was the reason, and obviously the cause behind how we managed to find out that there was something wrong in the first place.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So, and then it was just a matter of now that you've identified the issue, what was the prognosis, and did you end up getting a transplant, or were you able to heal the kidneys and get them to function and continue life? Like how what happened then after you
So,
discovered all this?
so obviously, after the initial diagnosis, what we did was, so with the healthcare system over here in the UK, we monitored them and managed as well as we could
Right.
over, and we did it over the period of about 5 years.
Oh wow. Okay. So a long period of time.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was a long period. In the grand scheme of things, I suppose, yeah, a long period of time. Considering when they first picked it up, my GFR or my kidney function was in the low 30s.
Hmm.
We managed to spread it out, but
Yeah.
obviously, as you know yourself that once there's an issue with the kidneys or whatever it might be, it's
Hmm.
just a case of managing it as well as you can over periods of time because they do get worse. The readings do degrade and get lower. So
Hmm.
we were just trying to extend this period of maintenance as long as we could.
Hmm.
Which lasted about 5 years, and then we got to a point where my kidney function started to enter the teens.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
my GFR was quite low, and they said, look, we need to add you to the transplant list. So, we can put you forward for, a donor, a deceased donor,
Hmm.
or you go home, have a word with your family, talk about the possibilities of living donors if someone is willing to, come forward.
Hmm.
Of which I did, and I was, luckily enough that my cousin stepped forward, and he said, "Yeah, test me. Let's see if we're a match." Which we did. We went through the testing, everything else. He was.
Hmm.
So they worked us up for the transplant, and in transplant.
Congratulations on that, by the way. That's
Oh,
amazing. That's an amazing
thanks, yeah.
story. Wow.
So yeah, so it was on March the 28th in 2018. We had the transplant done.
Wow. And your recovery, were you able to like start training like a year later? Like, was it a slow recovery, or how did that work? How did that process happen?
It was slow because obviously there's a lot of monitoring and healthcare that's involved immediately after the transplant
Sure.
because it's obviously the doctor's initial concern to make sure that that transplant takes and
Right.
it's working and functioning as well as it can, and everything else. So there's a lot of protective care in the first sort of 3 to 6 months.
Hmm.
Once they're happy that things have settled down, then obviously they allow you to start to continue your life as normal and everything
Hmm.
else. And I started to get back into the gym properly after about 6 months.
Okay, so it wasn't super long then. It was that's one would think for something of that magnitude that that's fairly quick. You
Yeah,
know.
and And if I'm being totally honest, I'd started to do bits in the gym before that as well, just of a
Uh,
very light, very light
yeah,
nature.
yeah, just to
You
get that movement and kind of continue. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Just to, get the blood moving, get some body parts moving and everything else. But it was about 6 months post-transplant that I started to sort of get my head back into things properly.
okay, and then I imagine like so now you're healing, you're getting better, and now men's physique exists.
Yeah.
So is this when you decided, okay, so I can pursue my love of bodybuilding in this group where I don't have to be quite as massive, right? So it's more conducive to I assume that it's less stressful on the body, being I don't know what weight you competed at in men's physique, but I'm assuming it's going to be like 220, 230, not 280.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, so 6 months post-transplant, we weren't quite at that point yet, but
Mhm,
it was my sole intention to get back into some form of fitness
mhm,
because and I think anybody who's been through any sort of trauma can probably relate to it, is that you remember your body the way it used to be. And obviously, you look back and you think, oh, I wish I could get like that again, or whatever it might be. So
mhm.
my main intention was to just get back in the gym and get my body to a point where I was confident again,
Yeah,
where I was happy with what I saw. Um, and the thing with the new kidney was, now that I had a body that actually functioned the way it should,
right.
it responded really well. Things that I was doing diet wise, training wise, I didn't have the water retention anymore. My blood pressure was under control. My kidney was working the way that it should do. Um, Everything just seemed to click,
Right.
really well. So at this point, I went back to see my original coach that I'd worked with for all these years. And I said to him, look, just help me get back to some form of fitness and look that I'd be happy with.
Mhm.
Um, so we worked together for about 3 months, and for the remaining of 2018 after the transplant, and then we got into the beginning of 2019, and he just said to me, "Do you know what? I think you could probably compete again." And that was when we started looking at men's physique, because you're quite right. There was no intention to be open bodybuilder anymore.
Right.
I couldn't take my body to that point. There'd be far too much of a risk.
Right.
So it was more of a case of, where do we think we will fit best in
Mhm.
the categories that are available to us now? So that was why we chose men's physique, because coming down from open, I already had a degree of muscle mass there,
Mhm.
and muscle memory counts for a lot as well.
Right.
So, to get my body to a certain point without having to push things too hard, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was easier than if I was trying to push to open or classic or something like this.
For sure.
Exactly. So we could do it in a way where my body was still comfortable, it wasn't stressed, and we could just sort of sculpt the physique into a way into men's physique. So
Right.
we did that. We aimed for, because I was still amateur at this point. We aimed for a spring show, and
Mhm.
I managed to get back on stage 13 months after my transplant.
Wow. That's incredible. That's an amazing result for this story, an amazing ending, if you will, or new beginning, really, is what this is. This is like it sounds like a rebirth almost of your career and your ability to compete. That's incredible. Okay. So let me ask you. So now we're healed, we've discovered a new area where you can compete. So what's the future like? What are the plans now? I mean, at this point, you're training people, you have your own gym, if
Hmm.
I recall correctly from the Men's Physique Show guys when I saw your interview, which is very successful. You have your own coaching business. So what's the future for Tyler Smith? What's next now that you're because you've reached the highest level there is, it seems like, as far as men's physique, really. So what is next? What is next on your ambition, on your list of things that you'd like to accomplish?
But it's a strange one, because that was why it was quite nice having the Arnolds this past
Uh-huh.
weekend, because um, in my wildest dreams, if we'd have gone back a few years, just after the transplant, and someone would have told me that in a few years' time you'll be standing on the Olympia stage in Vegas,
Mhm.
I don't know what words I'd have come out with, but uh, it was, and I said this to the guys the other week as well. It's strange because the goals in this sport seem to move all the time because I started this journey out at the very beginner level or amateur level, doing amateur regional shows, and then that became national shows, and then let's go for the pro card, and then okay, we've got the pro card now let's do some pro shows, and my first couple of pro shows, last call out, so then you start to doubt, have we come as far as we could possibly go? So then you think, no, no, we'll give it another go. And then you start working your way up the placings. You start making top fives, top threes. Then you
Mhm.
get a few second places, and you think, oh, do you know what? I'm so close to nearly getting
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And then you do get there, and then it's
Mhm.
like, oh right, well we've done, we finally made it to the Olympia, and then we get the Arnold invite and everything else. So I don't know. It's a really strange one at the minute because don't get me wrong, I'm under no illusion of, especially at Olympia level, who
Mhm.
I'm up against, and especially at my age as well. I'm not going to be a top 10 Olympia guy. I'm quite happy to admit that I know
Right.
what my level is and what I can achieve. So I don't know. It's a strange one because obviously I got to the Olympia. That's a massive box ticked off for me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's 1 in a million, you know?
Yeah, and it's something that I'll never forget. The obviously the Arnolds as well. I mean, I did this Arnolds, but I also did the Arnolds in the UK in 21 and 22 as
Mhm.
well. So, I've done 3 Arnold Classics and Olympia. I've had the pro win. I've had, quite a few second places. So I don't want to say I've ticked everything off, but
Mhm.
I'm just in a period now where I'm starting to figure out what's next.
Good. Good, good, good. Well, I mean, it seems to me like the futures, from what you're saying, seems very bright. You've been able to, like, do things that are wow, I mean, you've surmounted obstacles that would definitely stop a lesser man easily. So, I just want to say, well, first of all, thank you so much for the interview and for your time.
Oh no,
And
thank
thank you so much for this story, which is inspiring. My podcast is all about overcoming adversity, and
you.
this is a perfect example of a message that I hope that people will take and learn that no matter what adversity gets thrown your way, you can figure it out. You can figure it out. You can, if you have enough grit, you can push through it, and be successful, especially in an endeavor like yours, which is incredibly ambitious, and you did it, and you've been successful with it. So, Tyler, any words of inspiration, anything you want to, like, tell the audience before we go? Is there anything that you want to share? I don't know, thoughts,
Mhm.
ideas, anything.
Again, I think similar to, your own words just then, is that in life we're always going to have obstacles thrown in our way. We can look at them as opportunities, to maybe send us in a different direction, or we can look at them as challenges to overcome as well. So what I would say is, even if you experience trauma, or whatever it might be in your life, it doesn't have to define, what the rest of the road holds ahead for you. So that is down to you. You determine your own future and what you want to make of it. So, please, if something does happen, that's negative or unfortunate, don't let it get you down too much, because, with the right mindset, you can turn your future into whatever you want it to be.
Incredible words. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for your time. This was
No,
an amazing interview. Absolutely. And yeah, let's see. Maybe we can check in a year or so. Who knows? Maybe you'll place higher in that Olympia than you think.
we'll,
We'll
we'll,
have to see.
we'll try.
Yeah, we'll absolutely have to see. So again, thank you so much for your time and for the story and for the inspiration. It was amazing.
Thank
All
you.
right. Oh,